נכבה, תקעו. על נכבה תניה. מחנה פליטים תקעו. انت ودينك مسخره ومسخره
ערבי טוב, ערבי בקבר.
ערבי זה בן זונה, יהודי זה נשמה,
ערבי זה בן זונה.
שהוא ירביץ עם הדגל, לא דיברתי. זה הגזע. זה ידע.
הבית שלנו. פהם עליי, בית שלנו. מוות לערבים! מוות לערבים! מוות לערבים! מוות לערבים!
Why do you think the removal of Saddam hasn't improved the lives of Iraqis? Or has it? I don't know.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Oil, securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans, which made clear that the balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yanan's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
الله أكبر.
And this long-term goal is part of the Greater Israel Project. So in terms of the sectarian divide you see happening in Iraq today, it's actually all part of a very well-designed plan to try and secure the goal, this fantasy goal of the Greater Israel Project.
Do Black Lives Matter in Israel? If you ask some of the Ethiopian Jews who are citizens of the state, it doesn't feel that way. They've taken to the streets over the past several weeks to protest police brutality and racism in Israeli society. And this shouldn't be confused with the recent protests of African migrants who aren't Jewish and are seeking asylum. But back to the Ethiopians. These waves of protests were ignited in April after a video went viral of police violently beating an Israeli soldier of Ethiopian descent. And as Israel-based journalist and filmmaker David Sheen told me, that struck a chord with many.
Pretty much every single Ethiopian Jewish man in this country can speak to that experience. Either he's experienced it personally, or his brother, or his uncle, or his friends have been the victims of police brutality.
So what should you know about the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel? Today, at least 135,000 Ethiopian Jews live in the country, which is approximately 2% of the population. Many of them arrived after Israel airlifted them out during the years of the famine in the 1980s and 90s. Before that, thousands of Ethiopians tried to reach Israel by land, many dying on the journey. But today, despite the fact that these black Jews of Israel are citizens of the state, which entitles them to equal protection under Israeli law, and despite the fact that they serve in the Israeli army and speak fluent Hebrew, they have long been the victims of systemic discrimination. Just how bad is it?
Obviously, being the darkest hued Jews in the country, they face color-based discrimination that's not unlike in the United States and other parts of the world. The Ethiopian community has not been allowed to access to housing all over the country. They were sent to certain communities and other communities refused them. They were sent to certain schools and other schools refused them.
They've also suffered endemic poverty. At least 65% of Ethiopian children live below the poverty line. Just 5% of the community have college degrees, compared with 28% of the broader Jewish population. And on top of that, 1/5 of the inmates in juvenile facilities are Ethiopian Israelis. As organizer Moria Zalka told me, the younger generation of Ethiopian Israelis are fighting to change all of that.
We were born here, we were raised here, we got the education here. So we know our rights, we know what we want. Until we won't see a result, but true result and a long-term results, we won't stop.
California only has 100 Ethiopian Jews, including Samu and his family. Arriving at the age of 3, Esther, now 40, tells us about her school career in Beverly Hills.
I went to a Jewish private school from about 5 years old until I was about 14, right before high school. It was interesting. I was the only black girl there. Everybody else was white around me. I remember that there was a rabbi in our school. Actually, he was a substitute teacher, and he came for the day. And I remember coming back from recess, and he stopped me in front of everybody, and he said, "Stop, what are you doing here?" And being an 8-year-old or 7-year-old, I think during that time, what would somebody answer? Of course, I go to school here. And he said, "Well, you're not supposed to be here." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because you're black." I think that's one of the moments when I actually realized that I was different from everybody else. I mean, I knew I was different, but I also knew that I was color different.
Eleni, an African-American Jew of Ethiopian descent, has also experienced racism in the Jewish community.
People should really take the time to get to know, especially in the Jewish community, get to know their neighbors and get to know the people that comprise the Jewish people, and not perceive that it's only Ashkenaz Jews that are out there, only Sephardic Jews that are out there. And I think it's really tiring to explain over and over again who you are and what you're doing in shul.
Esther's father, Samu, a political exile in 1981, struggled to get his papers, a journey full of pitfalls where the Jewish community has repeatedly tried to harm it.
Every meeting I go, like Esther said, "You don't look Jewish. How do you become Jewish?" they say. Everybody doesn't look Jewish. Everybody looks like where they come from.
Elisheva Rishon, a Brooklyn Jew and African-American, moved to Los Angeles and launched a clothing brand inspired by her story.
I also want people to feel proud of being Jewish, because right now in America there has been a huge spike in anti-Semitism, And a lot of people feel afraid to show their Jewishness, and I think we should do the exact opposite. I think we should proudly show who we are.
But it's not just about black Jews. American Jews in this Latin community have a hard time being heard.
Especially in Jewish communities, there is a unique tie between our historical experience with oppression and modern current expressions of disenfranchisement or oppression in American communities that make us natural allies, specifically for black and brown communities in the U.S. And I hope that Jewish folk in America will work very hard to look inward at the way their Jewish communities are, to examine ways that they could be not only more welcoming to the true multiracial, multi-ethnic Jewish community that they have present already, but also how they can ground themselves in their Jewish identity to serve other communities.